Greetings, fellow humans. You know me as Iceman Caesar, and this is what's up in the world today. Going to be continuing the discussion about the murder of Pope John Paul I. Had part 1 last week, going to continue into part 2 this week. Good response to it last week, good discussions going. And if you look out into the world, you can kind of see how the different factions of Satan and his Illuminati are kind of fighting against each other. So we're definitely going to be talking more about that kind of thing in the near future. But this week I just want to focus on the second part of the discussion about the murder of Pope John Paul I. The first part last week was about kind of just establishing who Pope John Paul I was trying to expose, why it was such a big deal. So I wanted to do that one. Hopefully everything was clear. Everyone was able to follow along and wasn't confused or anything like that. And now this week I'm just going to be going over everything in kind of a chronological order, leading up to the information that Pope John Paul I got, which led him to move forward to trying to bring these guys to justice, and then the events leading up to his murder, and then the kind of things that were looked to be done to cover it up afterwards. So this is all this information from an amazing book from an amazing author, David Yallop. The book's called In God's Name. So I told you about it last week, so hopefully some people were able to read it. And but if not, that's where the information is coming from. That's where all the information he got from his investigation was put. So we can't say enough great things about the courage that he showed to bring this truth to light, to try and bring justice to what happened. And when you read about how amazing of a man Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I was, you read about what he was planning to do, and then you just realize and you read about what happened to him. You realize what an amazing man he was, what an amazing pope he was. He would have probably been known as the greatest pope if he had been able to live out his natural life. And it's an absolute shame that he wasn't. But it's up to us to help realize the things that he wanted to accomplish, and to not let him just fade into the night. We're the ones that are responsible for bringing justice to this situation. And if we're able to do this, we're not only will we be able to do a great thing and bring injustice to everything that happened to Pope John Paul I, but if we succeed, then our world, the control of Satan and his Illuminati will end, and that will be the absolute greatest day. And it will be the best version of this world is certainly not controlled at all by Satan and his Illuminati. So if we can succeed in this, we will just have such an amazing world to live in, and it's just it'll be such a great day. So, but it's up to us and our responsibility. So, gonna get right into it. Have a lot to go over and cover. So hopefully you're able to follow along and stay with me. And but like I say, this information is coming from the book In God's Name by the author David Yallop. So if you can either grab that book to kind of follow along, or this is kind of taken from the book and just try to break it down as simple as possible to explain here. So I'm just going to get right into it. Start with, I guess, kind of the best place to start would be June 7th, 1929, and that was the date where the church was kind of officially sold out, so to speak. Pope Pius the 11th, I believe. I'm good. I'm okay with Roman numerals, but not 100%. So, but I believe Pope Pius the 11th was the pope at the time, and he sold the church's right to govern over the papal states. So that basically he just sold out the right for the church to govern the states, to help that were in these states were helping the poor, and just a lot of good things were being done. But on June 7th, 1929, these papal states were sold out, and the right to govern them was sold away from the church. Then in 1933, there was a German, ecclesiastical tax. I think I said that right. But this tax was put in place, and it was a deal between the Vatican and the emerging Nazi Germany. And see, the thing about the really messed up thing about Nazi Germany, when you read about Satan and his Illuminati, was that Nazi Germany was supposed to be the new world order. Like, it was supposed to be the Nazi Germany was certainly supposed to win and establish the kind of society that they were going to set up. But they could not control Hitler, and they had to turn everything. They had to turn on him, and it was eventually about him. I'm not saying Hitler was a good guy; he was not. But I'm just saying that he was a bad guy that turned on the bad guys and turned into a worse guy. It's just, I mean, it's all bad. It's all dealing with bad, like scumbags. But what I'm saying is that they were all on the same team, on the same side to start, and Nazi Germany was supposed to be the new world order, but they could not control Hitler, so that plans had to change. And that's why the U.S. wasn't in the war at the start. That's why Russia was not against Germany at the start, because things were the landscape was completely different. But things changed as the war went on, but that's a whole other video, another story. But I will be breaking down that and getting into it. But that's just But there was this ecclesiastical tax was a deal started between the Vatican and the emerging Nazi Germany, and this tax, which is still in place to this day. That just blows me away. But this tax gave the Vatican just huge increase in financial power, because that tax is sending money to them, an absolute constant flow. Just turn that into a river of money. And I didn't look this up, but I can just only imagine how many other countries have this ecclesiastical tax that sends money to the Vatican. So they're making money for nothing. They're stealing money from the good people of this tax, stealing money from the good people of Germany to funneling it to themselves and spreading out to all their little scumbag friends. So it's but this ecclesiastical tax is still in place to this day, and it's if they were doing what they're supposed to doing and just helping the poor, nobody was getting rich off it. There were no scumbag hands in the pot. Like, if there was, then it wouldn't be a problem if everybody was contributing to help people that are less fortunate. It's not the idea that's the problem. It's the way these scumbags executed it. And so obviously they're doing the absolute bare minimum that they have to help poor people, so that when people look at them, they can't say, oh, they're not helping anybody. They can say, oh, look, they're helping some poor people. And that way, everything else they've done, all the other bad things they do, just get washed over. But this tax, this tax is still in place to this day, and it was one of the ways that the Vatican was able to get a big increase in financial power. Then in 1942, all charity and apostolic works went into the stock market and were put into the stock market, making them no longer for charity but for profit. Now, so that they were taking the money that was for charity and made for charity, and they were putting it, instead of using it to help poor people, they were using it to invest in the stock market to increase profits for themselves and all their scumbag friends that had their hands in the pot. So it's on paper that could be used for good. I mean, you take money, you invest in the stock market, you get more money, and that means you have more money to help the poor people and less fortunate people with. But that's not the way it works. Those are unfortunately, good people aren't in control of it. It's the scumbags, so they just put the more money in their pockets into their other scumbags' pockets. But in 1942, that move was made to put everything into the stock market. And then also in 1942, they created a Vatican Bank, which was going to allow them to help conceal their corrupt charities, and it was going to really help them to redirect the money and to help wash the money in certain cases, so that they could hand it out to everybody that wanted a piece of it. And it's just this this disgusting, illegal, little empire was just flourishing, because they're, like I said before in the other video, these guys with the way that they're thinking, because they had access to, more education, things like that. They're thinking way ahead than like the normal people that are in societies. That's why they're able to get ahead, because they're just thinking about things like on a different level, and just putting the charity and apostolic works into the stock market, and creating a Vatican bank to help keep that process, clean. And then well, the other thing from 1942 is that Mussolini exempted the Vatican from paying taxes on profits, which was a huge power move for them. That means now all the money that they're making that is in profit, they get 100% to keep 100%. They don't have to give. They're not helping the poor. They're not helping the Italian economy. Nothing. It's 100% going back into these scumbags' pockets. So those three things in 1942 were very, very important, kind of red letter tentpole events that helped these guys just set up this illegal empire that lasted for so long and still lasts to this day. But then in 1967, Italy had finally been fed up and had enough of this no tax agreement and ended it in 1967. So that meant the Vatican would take a big hit on into their profits if they were to stay invested in Italy. And so at this point, that was letting them pay no taxes on profits was a huge power move for them. But so losing that was a big deal, and it would have meant huge. It was a big hit to their power and control. So they were desperate, and in a desperate attempt to kind of cling on to their power, Pope Paul VI, I believe, turned to the mafia. And man, the more I read about these stories and into later into history, it's like the bigger the influence mafia was. Now I understand kind of why the mafia has been romanticized in Hollywood, and there's such a movement to turn them into the good guys and to romanticize it, because they had such a big influence on real society, and a negative one that if you start looking into history and you see the mafia connections, you get your feelings are already kind of you've already made your mind up that these are you have positive feelings towards the mafia and mafia characters, so you start to kind of see them as the good guys and start to think that just justify the things that they did and see them as good, but you have to separate yourself from movies and reality. And in movies it's fine to enjoy watching mafia characters and to have a positive connection with them on a movie, but it's totally different in reality, because it is different. I mean, they're painting they're painting it's just, the movies are fantasy, but reality, when you look into it, it's like, man, you just understand why the mafia were so powerful, and why that is why the Illuminati was created in 1776, because Satan could see that with the coming society, just the old world order was not going to have the same influence as they did previously. That's the mafia and Freemasonry was a huge part of control, and making sure that people, the family, the mafia is all about the family, keeping it in the families, and marrying in it's not incest, but marrying in different families, and then marrying off your son to this family's daughter, and it's like you start to make the connections, and it's like it's tough if you don't have all the information about Satan and his Illuminati, and then looking at about Freemasonry and just all the other secret societies, and just seeing that satanic kind of food chain that I was using my friend the whiteboard for last time. Just if you don't see how it works and set up, you can't really understand you just can't really understand how everything works. So I just hopefully there was hopefully with everything I explained in the first video, it's easier to see how the influence of the mafia used to be so much greater, and how they used to use it. And in this story, there's no bigger example than this story of the murder of Pope John Paul I. But that's how they were brought into the church. It was just in a desperate attempt to cling to power. Pope Paul, he turned to the mafia to try and help them hang on to it. And the two I think the two biggest moves he made was he made somebody called the Gorilla, Paul Marcinkus. He made him a bishop, and this is apparently a guy with no conscience. He was from Al Capone country, and he was just he was a he was not a good character at all. And the second big connection he made was to someone named Michel Sindona, was a banker, and this guy had huge connections to the mob and big time connections to Freemasonry, and specifically the P2 Lodge. And this guy was big time. His big things were the Code of Silence and assassinations if that needed to be done. So it's two bad characters brought into, the goodness and wholesomeness of the church. Like, it's just disgusting to read about this, but it's actually happened. You can go read about it yourself. Like, it's all there in history. And so, that's the thing. There was a third player, another banker, Licio Gelli, and this guy was important because he was a big connection to Freemason and P2, but he was like the Grand Master or whatever the hell they call themselves. But this guy was one of the big influences and one of the leaders and kind of that part of it. So there were three like big connections that the church made to the mafia, but like they're all the connection just goes back to Satan. So he was able to infiltrate the church in that way. And as usual, typical with all these guys, Pope Paul was publicly condemning the actions that they were committing in private. So but that's not new to them. That's not old news. It happens today. That is their strategy, to publicly condemn what they're doing in private, so that people believe the smoke and mirrors, and they just believe the bullshit. But that's not new to anything. And so then finally in 1970, to try and maximize their profits and to get back their power and control, they liquidated their assets in Italy and then reinvested them in other countries. And this way they were able to avoid being taxed on their profits, but they absolutely crushed Italy's economy. To have all that investment and all that money and everything into Italy, and all of a sudden to take it all out at once, there's no way. Of course it's going to collapse and have trouble recovering. So, excuse me. It's just, it just drives me insane to read about. It just disgusts me to see that they're playing games with people's hard-earned money and people's lives, and I feel bad about for all of the good people in Italy that had to suffer through the fallouts and ramifications of these scumbags, pulling out all their investments out of Italy to try and just get as much money as possible. And that's the thing about these guys. Their God is money and their law is profit. So that's all they know, and that's all they do, and that's all they care about. And then in 1971, the Vatican brought in yet another mafia shark, somebody named Roberto Calvi, another banker that was going to help them with the money. It's all about, like I said, it's all about money to them. Their God is money and their law is profit. And as this illegal empire grew, it involved more and more people who wanted a piece of the pie. And as they were able to have more power, it's a power move to approach someone and be like, hey, look what I can do for you. Like, I got so much power, I got so much this and that. So it's more people were involved, more hands in the pie. But as history has shown, the bigger things get, the harder it is to keep it under control, the harder it is to keep it secret, and the harder it is to keep people from. You're dealing with scumbags dealing with scumbags, so you can't trust anybody. Everybody's trying to backstab you. Everyone's trying to get more of your share into their share. So it's just, but as this thing started to get bigger, things were starting to close in on them a little bit. Authorities were starting to take notice of all this, of all the kind of things that were happening. You can only eventually the money trail starts to become more and more clear, and good people in the world are trying to figure this out, and eventually they're going to be able to find what they're looking for, and that's what started to happen. But Around this time, they to try and hang on to their power, just to try and cling to the little control that they had. They just stepped up the blackmail, the killings, the corruptions, and just anything they could do to cling to power, they would do. It didn't matter. These guys have no conscience, no morals, no mercy, nothing like that. But then we get to 1972, and here comes the first kind of clash between Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, and this illegal empire, that was run like basically Satan and his Illuminati. And so the mafia had control of the Vatican Bank, which is called Banco Ambrosiano. In Italian, I probably butchered that, but I'm doing my best. But and turned it into a cleaning house for dirty money. I mean, a Vatican bank should be a place where just help anybody that's less fortunate. It should be one of the most positive places in the world, and just have nothing but positive connections with people, trying to help as many people as possible. But these scumbags used it as a cleaning house for dirty money, and it absolutely frustrates me to no end to read about it, and to know how many people had to suffer because of the things that they did. But that wasn't enough. For them to have control of the Vatican Bank. They wanted more. It's never enough for them. They never can have enough money. They can never have enough power. They can never bring their negativity and evil to too many people. So it's never enough for them. And in 1972, they tried to seize the bank that Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, was tasked with being a guardian of. And in 1972, they tried to take control of this bank. And Bishop Luciani, who would become Pope John Paul I later in life, he was the only one that tried to protest this. The only one, which is good foreshadowing for what he would eventually do. That would unfortunately cost him his life. But his protest fell on deaf ears, and it was to no avail, as they sold it anyways. And it definitely stuck with Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, that Pope Paul allowed Paul Marcinkus to sell his clean, honest bank that helped so many poor people. That was it was what a bank connected with the church is supposed to be. He allowed Marcinkus to sell this bank to Roberto Calvi, and to allow them to start to steal the money and to use it to put it back into their pockets, and to use it to wash their dirty money. And Albino Luciani certainly did not forget this, and it was but unfortunately at the time there was nothing he could do about it. And then in 1973, the investigators from the U.S. Department of Justice were dismissed. These guys just had too much power and control. The investigators weren't getting anywhere. The power people that had to allow these guys to access to information and places to conduct their investigations weren't going to allow that. So there was no point. And in 1973, they were just dismissed, sent home. And but in 1974, thanks to Michel Sindona siphoning funds to help pay for all of his other this scumbag, just all the scumbag dealings he was in, like that. But dealing with the way these guys are, they had a lot of problems with things. Things would collapse. They're stealing money from economies and from banks and from people. Like you only steal so much before things eventually collapse and go wrong. So he was starting to take losses in other areas, and he was siphoning funds out of a certain bank in the U.S., the Franklin National Bank in New York. And because of this Michel Sindona siphoning millions out of the bank, it eventually crashed in 1974. But this would be the thing that sent Michel Sindona to prison. So it's it's awful for all the good people that had to suffer and were involved with the crash. All their money and investments were involved in the bank, and that's the money that gets stolen, and those are the people that suffer for it. So, but this, it sent a pretty big scumbag to prison, and at the same time, it just opened it opened the books and opened things up for people to be like, okay, there's a lot of corruption going on. There's a lot of, a lot of bad activity going on. So let's follow the trails and let's figure out who's doing this and bring them to justice. So that went down in 1974. And then in 1978, this illegal empire was started to be in big trouble. And Roberto Calvi was being threatened from all sides. Everything was starting to close in on him. And that's the thing. These guys are involved in so much negative, illegal, evil activity that it's not. There's no long term for it. It can't sustain itself long term. So eventually, the things just start to close in, and that's what Roberto Calvi was finding in 1978. The walls were starting to close in, and he was trying. So he was trying to run and try to hide in South America. Licio Gelli, the banker that was the big connection to the Freemasons, I guess he's the Grand Master or whatever, he was already in South America hiding. Like, these cowards, they do their illegal, evil shit, and when they get caught, they run like the little cowardly. Try not to get too riled up, but it just, oh man, it sparks something out of me. Let me tell you. And so Calvi and Gelli are trying to, one of them's in South America, the other's trying to get there to hide. Michel Sindona is in prison, absolutely terrified of being extradited to Italy because Italian justice is much different from the justice that he faced in the U.S. prison where he is. But Bishop Marcinkus, being in his position, allowed them all to breathe, because with him there, he could keep the walls from collapsing and the roof from coming down in on them, and he could give them time to breathe and figure things out, and to try and see if they could stop the fall and stop things from going backwards. But without him, they would all fall to ruin and some of them death. So keeping Paul Marcinkus as a bishop was a big key to keeping this illegal empire going. And so that is why coming up in August 1978, something happened that totally changed everything and really forced them to take a risk that they've gotten away with up to this point, but hopefully with people like me trying to put this truth out there, and thank God for the author David Yallop for his amazing book, because of that, hopefully they eventually think the truth will come to light, and the entire illegal empire of Satan and his Illuminati will come crushing down. It absolutely will. I know it will. We just got to get there. But moving on, in August 1978, when this illegal empire was in big trouble, Pope John Paul I was elected to the papacy. And his nickname was God's Candidate, and he was described as an honest, holy, incorruptible pope on a collision course with an evil empire. And that is exactly what he was. When you read about his life and you read about what he was going to do and who he was going up against, that could not be more true of a sentence. And he was absolutely determined to make sure that the illegal, unholy activities would be stopped under his holy leadership. And he was ready to go. He was ready to. He had the Holy Spirit. He had fortitude. He was not scared of these guys. He was ready to take it to them and try to bring them down. And he almost did it. Almost succeeded. And with our help, he'll be able to succeed. And but to just go over some of the players coming up in the murder of Pope John Paul I. There's somebody named Cardinal Velo. You'll definitely be hearing about him a lot. He was maybe one of the biggest key players in this. Bishop Paul Marcinkus, obviously he was one of the big players in this. Michel Sindona, the banker we talked about. Roberto Calvi and all his accomplices. The Freemason P2 and also the P2 Lodge. They're kind of the same but kind of separate. but Freemasonry was a huge part of the like Satan and his Illuminati and keeping control, especially before the Illuminati. Like Freemasonry, Freemasonry and like those secret societies and things like that had a much bigger influence before the modern world. But excuse me, they still do have an influence, just not as big as they did. But the more you read about things, the more you read about history further back, you can kind of see the history and how many people were connected to Freemasonry and things like that. So they're big players. The Grand Master, whatever the hell they call themselves, Licio Gelli. So these guys were. These guys were pretty much like that covers most of the main players for the murder of the Pope, John Paul I, and all these guys needed a collision with the new Pope not to happen. Like they did not, even though this collision was coming, they needed it not to happen. Because with all the eyes on them and all the hands in the pot and just all the trouble that they were having with keeping everything together, they could not afford a ripple in business. They could not afford to have anything be exposed so somebody could look in and see what's going on. So they could not have anything like that happen, and so they needed a solution that would be quick and easy and take care of absolutely all the issues they were facing with this collision course with the new Pope. And that is exactly what kind of plan they put in place. And so that brings us to August 27th, so during his 33-day reign as Pope, and see that's the other thing. For those that know about Freemasonry and the Satan and his Illuminati and things like that, you know how big they are into numbers and symbols and all that kind of bullshit. And 33 is a big number in Freemasonry. And what did they do? They killed this Pope that was trying to crush them. On the 33rd day of his papacy. So it's, stuff like that just shows that these guys are. Like some people look at that as a coincidence, but when you know about the facts, it just the puzzle pieces fit together. So it is what it is. But that's so during his 33-day reign as the Pope. He remembered, like I said before, when they sold his bank and all those people suffered. He remembered the priests and the poor that had been robbed when his clean, honest, good, holy bank was sold, and he remembered the things that were told to him about what happened by the other priests and the bishops involved in the banks. He remembered all those things, and he vowed to make it right. He vowed to bring it to justice, and he would leave no stone unturned. He would leave no area unchecked. He was going to do an absolute 100% thorough house cleaning of everything. And so on August 27th, 1978, Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, asked Cardinal Villot to stay on as the Secretary of State until he could find his way. But the only reason he did this was to try and keep his enemies close, where he could keep an eye on them, so that when the time was right, he would be able to bring them to justice. And it's a smart play, but it is an absolutely risky play, and and it shows, because in this case it probably cost Albino Luciani his life. Because who knows? I'm sure they would have. This was so important that they probably would have tried to get him anyway. But allowing these scumbags to be around him was one of the big things that allowed them to do what they did. So. But that's what happened on August 27th, 1978, and it was a big risk, but unfortunately it was one that it probably cost him his life. And but that was when Pope John Paul I ordered an immediate investigation of the entire Vatican financial operations. No department, no congregation, no section would be excluded. The report was to be discreet, quick, and complete. He was going after everything. He was not leaving any stones unturned. He was cleaning house, and this was Danny Tanner style cleaning house. Okay, absolutely every nook and cranny was going to be looked under and cleaned out. And it was, I mean, but that's what needed to be done. There was so much filth that had been allowed into the church that this needed to be done. And so his first task was going to be cleaning up the Vatican Bank, because that's the biggest, and that was the one that had the most, that was most in the public eye, and it needed, absolutely desperately needed to be addressed, because it was being denounced in the press and financial circles. And it's just that's not the reputation that the bank associated with God deserves or should have. And it's up to people that are responsibility, like the Pope, to make sure that this doesn't that it has the proper reputation. So excuse me, that was going to be his first focus. But the reason why they moved so quickly the reason why they moved so quickly to try and remove the Pope was because that if he uncovered the full extent of everything going on, like all the robberies, the frauds, the illegalities, the crimes, the murders, he knew about a good chunk of that, but he didn't know the full extent. If he had known the full extent of everything that was going on, nothing would have been able to move or shift his purpose. His sole focus would have been on making this right, bringing everybody to justice, and cleaning this up. So they had to move fast, so that he uncovered as little information about everything as possible. And eventually the report came in revealing 121 members belonging to Masonic lodges. That's Freemasonry. 121 members of the Roman Curia, of the leadership of the Catholic Church, basically. 121 members were connected to Freemasonry. And Freemasonry is connected to Satan and his Illuminati. That's where it all goes back there. So it's like 121 members who are supposed to be representing God and Jesus, and we're supposed to be helping the less fortunate, helping the poor, spreading the good word. All these people are connected to Satan and are secretly using God and Jesus to lure people down the wrong path, and to hide the truth, and to make people think that deception is the truth, and people then to take people desperately searching for God and Jesus, and to pretend like they're giving them that, but they're actually connecting them to Satan, making their lives worse and keeping them away from God and Jesus. Like, it's just disgusting. It boils my blood, and it fills me with so much resolve to make sure that Satan and his Illuminati are absolutely crushed, and they're brought to justice, and that their control of this world ends. Good people get control of it, and that we can build the best version of this world, because that's what we're born to do. That's what this world is all about, so we can fight and scratch and claw to get to the best version of it. And even with our free will, that's a thing. If we can make the best version of this world with our collective free will of everybody, there's no better energy that anyone will ever feel. We could do this in our lifetime. Think about how lucky we could be to live in a lifetime where we live in the best version of society, in the best version of Earth and this world. Like, it's so close yet so far, but it is achievable in our lifetime. We just have to get there, and uncovering the truth and spreading it out there about what the murder of Pope John Paul I and everything he was trying to do. He was trying to do basically what I'm trying to do now. I identify so strongly with Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I. Like, he was going to be injecting so much true Christianity into Catholicism. Like, he was going to flip Catholicism on its head, like, people would have been spinning. I would have just loved to see the reaction of the Catholic Church for some people about the things that Albino Luciani was going to bring to them. But it wouldn't have been a fight. It wouldn't have chased people away. It would have opened their eyes and allowed that connection to strengthen and deepen. It would have been such a great, amazing thing. But it's through his example, and just connecting ourselves to God and Jesus, and using the same strength and the same energy that Pope John Paul I tapped into to do what he did. We can continue that and do what we need to do our part to bring Satan and his Illuminati down. It just makes me excited when I think about it, but it just also really boils my blood when I read about all the things that they do. And 121, God. But he got his report, and I'm sure he had the similar reaction to me. The key names showed up on this list. I mean, big ones like Cardinal Velo, Bishop Marcinkus among them. Like, it was just, but the one that shocked him the most was Cardinal Velo. I guess he presented himself as a very good man, and that one caught Albino Luciani off guard. So he didn't. But didn't deter him at all. He was absolutely determined to crush this illegal house of cards, and he had the proof to do it. He didn't just want to do it; he had the meat and potatoes to get this done. But he just, unfortunately, it was just he was so close, but they got to him before he could get it out there. And but that's the thing. They knew that if they could get to Luciani, and if they could kill him, and if Luciani died before Marcinkus was removed, they would all have time. They would have their room to breathe, and they thought that everything would be okay as long as Luciani died before Marcinkus was removed. Even though he had all this information and he had all this proof and facts, if they could kill him before he actually started to make movements and started to make some decisions, they'd be okay. They could deal with it and get rid of it and just weather the storm. And another big name on there that was on the report was somebody named Cardinal Baggio, who has a big role later on. And but this time Roberto Calvi was very worried about this new pope. Michel Sindona was absolutely terrified that he was going to be extradited from New York to Italy without Marcinkus. He was just terrified. Somebody like Cardinal Cody, who is responsible for being responsible for leadership in Chicago, he would be facing big justice for his role because a lot of corrupt illegal activities were happening under his leadership in Chicago. So all these guys realized that Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, had this information. He had collected it, and he was ready to go with it. He was not scared. He was going to move forward. He was just making sure he had everything good to go, and then he was going to push forward with it. So these guys were very worried, and they were ready to do anything they needed to do to stop this. And now, see, the thing is, when a pope dies, any decisions that are not yet publicly announced die with him. So anything that Luciani wanted to do, if he had not publicly announced it yet, it would die with him if he died. So that's why they knew that they could be okay and probably weather this storm if they could kill him before he started actually doing anything about this. And so when they were making their plan to do this, they also made sure that they had a replacement ready to go, so that when they killed Pope John Paul I, it would immediately begin to bury the legacy and just to get people to forget and just to start to reshape the reality into a absolutely distorted truth that is just no kind of truth at all. And it was not. They even gave the replacement the exact same name, Pope John Paul II. And it's just to make sure that they would bury any kind of notion of Pope John Paul I. And it worked. The only name I knew was Pope John Paul II, and that was probably their mistake. It was actually probably a big mistake, because if I'm able to have any effect on things, I probably never would have even known about what happened with this if they had given him a different name than Pope John Paul II. Because one of the reasons why I started looking into this was, hey, Pope John Paul II was a big popular figure throughout my life. I wonder who Pope John Paul I was. Maybe, and because of that, I learned about all this and was just finally opened my eyes and my heart to the truth. But it was they had somebody ready to go that was loyal to them, that would help them, and that would not do the same things that Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, was going to do, and they even gave him the same damn name. Just disgusts me. But then we moved to September 28th, 1978, and this was where Luciani had a meeting with that person, Cardinal Baggio. And this meeting was to discuss two decisions that Luciani had made. The first was he was going to be removing Cardinal Cody from his position in Chicago. And the second decision was that he was going to be sending Cardinal Baggio, who he was having the meeting with, he was going to be sending him to Venice to be the patriarch there because they did not have one. Now, Baggio had no objection to the first, but he was reportedly absolutely furious with the second, because Venice would be far, far away from the illegal activities of the Vatican Bank, and he knew what the Pope was doing, trying to divide them up, so it was harder for things. So he was absolutely furious at this decision, and he reportedly reacted to this decision with violence and anger. And after he had his little tantrum, he just flat out refused to accept the assignment, and just flat out said no. So he it didn't matter if anybody else is getting thrown under the bus, but for himself, obviously that was crossing the line. So I mean, the first decision that Pope John Paul I made was didn't have any objections to it, but the second one he absolutely flipped out over. So that is the first big thing that happened on that day, September 28th, 1978. And then Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, later on in a meeting, told Cardinal Felice about that difficult confrontation with Baggio, and he also informed him that he was having an upcoming meeting with Cardinal Villot. So I mean, he relayed this information to Cardinal Felice about the difficult confrontation, and told him about a meeting he was about to have with Cardinal Villot. And later during the meeting with Cardinal Villot, he informed him that he had read the report and he had met with Bishop Marcinkus, and that meeting was very cool. And it did not go well. Luciani said Marcinkus would be removed immediately without delay, and he would also be dismissing all members connected to Marcinkus Mafia, and he would be cutting all ties with Michele Sindona and the Roberto Calvi groups and their banks, and everybody associated with these guys. All ties would be cut, and they would be removed from their leadership positions. And this was a huge move for the Pope John Paul I to make, because no such authority had been taken by a pope since 75 years earlier, when Pope Pius X, I believe, broke the power of the Freemason Cardinal Rampella, who was under, believe the Pope was Leo at the time. I start to get confused with all that, with all the different names and stuff. But 75 years earlier, the Freemasons had big time control, but Pope Pius X broke that power. So I mean, that's, when you look, you see how far back the Freemasonry goes, how far these guys have been trying to get power, how far they've had power, and how many people are connected with it. And I know it gets confusing because we're in the modern world, so Satan and his Illuminati are they're the ones that are in control, and that is Satan. That is what Satan uses to control and move forward. So it's like when you talk about, and look back in history, I mean, the Illuminati didn't exist, so you're talking about Freemasonry, you're talking about Vatican royals. It's just, you're talking about all these secret societies, occultism, witchcraft, paganism, just all these things. And but it's all connected. It's all the same thing. So this action, but a pope taking this kind of action to really crush illegal activity hadn't been seen in 75 years. But obviously desperately needed to be seen at this time. And then Luciani discussed the situation of Cardinal Cody in Chicago, and once again there was no objection to this from Cardinal Velo. They also discussed Cardinal Baggio's refusal to take his assignment to Venice, and Pope John Paul I believed that Baggio should go where he was assigned. That's what popes and bishops and cardinals did, and he had a role that could be filled there. So I mean, the Pope John Paul I felt that that's what he should just do what he was assigned. But then the new Pope dropped the big bomb on Cardinal Velo that caught him completely off guard, that he was not ready or prepared for. And Luciani told Velo that he was going to be replaced as Secretary of State by Cardinal Benelli. And I know I'm saying lots of names. It might be hard to follow. So I mean, you could follow along like on Google or if you have the book or anything. But it's just hopefully you're able to keep with me and follow along with all the names. But so Pope John Paul I told Cardinal Velo he was being replaced as Secretary of State by Cardinal Benelli. Now Velo was prepared to be replaced with everything going on, but he was sure he was going to be replaced with somebody named Cardinal Casaroli, who was loyal to Velo, and it wouldn't have been a big deal at all. But for Luciani to kind of throw him a curveball and say he was being replaced by Cardinal Benelli, this Benelli definitely would have done things in line with what Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, wanted to do. So this was a big, big bomb to be dropped on Cardinal Velo, and given the events that would happen, obviously it was big enough to make them to immediately move to do something about it. So this was probably one of the biggest events of Luciani dropping this bomb, that Velo was going to be replaced by somebody that he did not expect. And Velo reportedly remained calm while he was being told this. And he reportedly remained calm, but had a very, very icy, cold demeanor to him. And then eventually, finally objected to all the decisions, saying that they were contrary to what the late Pope Paul's wishes were, and that it would be said that Luciani betrayed Pope Paul. And this discussion lasted for 2 hours, and it was Velo was starting to let his true colors come out, trying to stay calm and keep his poker face, but just couldn't let it happen. I mean, Pope Paul, was an absolute scumbag. So, I mean, he sold the church out. He's one of the biggest reasons why Satan and his Illuminati gain more power, especially within the church. So it's you can see how these guys are, just like I said in the Chris Benoit video, these guys don't like when wrongs are done to another, and they like to try and stay loyal like that. So it was this bomb was a huge impact on them, and obviously really, really scared them to the point where they had to move to immediate action. So by the time Pope left the meeting with Velo, there was already night. And so then Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, went and spoke to Cardinal Colombo at 8:45 p.m. And this what I believe would be one of the last people that Albino Luciani would ever speak to. It was 8:45 p.m. and Luciani informed him of the changes that he had planned to make. And Cardinal Colombo said he spoke for a long time. He was full of serenity. He was full of hope, with no inference of physical illness at all. And in fact, his final greeting was just pray. And that his final greeting was good night, and I'll see you in the morning if God is willing. He said it in Latin, I believe, but I'm not going to try and butcher that. But I believe, in Latin, his final greeting was, I'll see you in the morning if God is willing. And unfortunately, you would not see him in the morning due to, awful circumstances, but we're getting there. And it was at 4:45 a.m. when Sister Vicenza found the Pope sitting up in bed with an expression of agony on his face, but unfortunately he was dead. And then at 5 a.m., Cardinal Velo confirmed the death and began to illegally and methodically take control of matters. Same guy that the Pope John Paul I dropped the bomb, that information bomb on earlier in that day, same one that's right on the scene to make sure things are getting cleaned up and taken care of. And he was he was observed packing up the bottle of Ephedrine medication from the bedside table, the notes of transfers and appointments decided from the previous day out of the Pope John Paul I's hand, removed the Pope's glasses and slippers, and his will. And despite all of these things being vigorously searched for, none were ever seen again. Wonder where they could have gone. Then Cardinal Villot would phone the embalmer and swore everybody that was around and that knew, including Sister Vicenza, swore them all to silence. Then at 6:30 a.m., all the other cardinals were finally informed, 2 full hours after calling the embalmers. But the Pope's faithful secretary was concerned because Luciani was in good health and sudden death was extremely unlikely. So he phoned Luciani's personal physician, who left for Rome at once, because this was significant, and despite what people try and say afterwards, there was no inference of physical illness, no signs that he was in distress or in trouble. This whole situation stunk. So once Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I's personal physician, heard about it, he immediately went to try and go there to figure things out for himself. And so somebody named Sergeant Rojan was on duty that night, and he suddenly came face to face with Paul Marcinkus on the premises at 6:45 a.m. in a place where he should not have been. And Paul Marcinkus did not even blink when informed of the Pope's death. So you hear that a Pope has suddenly died, you'd think that you'd have some kind of reaction, but no reaction, just a stone cold, icy stare. And so then it was decided to move forward with the embalming of the Pope to that evening, which was extremely unusual and extremely illegal. So already they are doing whatever they have to cover their tracks and to move forward with their disgusting plan. Now, there was much action on the 3rd floor of the Papal Palace throughout this day, more specifically in the Pope's bedroom. And their efforts were underway to clean the entire apartment, which would destroy any evidence that could be left behind and could be collected to try and figure out, what else might have been going on. Stuff like fingerprints and vomit that was seen that would have been there from a possible poisoning of his Ephedrine medication. So none of all that was cleaned up. None of that could be tested none of that could be tested to see if there was any traces of poison or anything like that. It was immediately the apartment was being cleaned. His clothes, his letters, his notes, his books, and a small handful of personal monuments all were carried away. And by 6 p.m. there was nothing left in the entire papal apartments remotely associated with the papacy of Albino Luciani. Within a day, they killed him. They cleaned everything up. They removed all of his stuff, anything that would link to Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, within less than 24 hours. They were so obsessed and so determined to erase his legacy and, to bury him and everything that he lived for, that they did all this less than 24 hours. Didn't even wait at all. That's how serious this is, and that's how big of an impact this information would have had if Pope John Paul I would have been able to bring it forward to the public. And so now we move to this is just so the type of embalming that they requested for Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, was considered strange and absolutely repugnant, because never before in the history of embalming popes had this ever been done or requested. So they did. So how Albino Luciani's body was handled in the aftermath of his death was never ever happened before in the history of popes. And Albino Luciani, the only pope that is, not the only, but one of the only popes to ever really make a big step forward to try and crush Satan and his Illuminati. It's just, that's a red flag. That is a smoking gun for them to do something they've never ever done in the history of popes, but they do it with Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I. That doesn't add up. But what they did, at the Vatican insistence, no blood was drained and no organs were removed. Like, are you kidding me? The new pope just dies suddenly, and you're not gonna do a complete and full autopsy, drain the blood, the organs, do every single test you can possibly do to make sure there were no nefarious actions going on. Like, this is, they were so desperate that they did things that were just so obvious to anybody with common sense, anybody who was looking at this, trying to figure out what was going on. Like, they were so desperate, they just had to do these things, whether they were left out there exposed or not. And they just had to hope that people would not figure it out en masse. It would just kind of end up getting buried as time went on. So they took, but no blood was drained and no organs removed. Like, absolute, give me a break, man. And so, and because of this, the process of doing it took such a long time. 3 hours to embalm Pope John Paul I, because they were made crystal clear to not spill a drop of blood or anything like that, because even one drop of blood would have shown a trace of poison or anything like that. And they were told not to. They were specifically told, you do not remove any of the organs, because if any of the organs had been available for autopsy, they would have seen the evidence of illegal, evil activity. And an autopsy, that's what you do. That's what happens when somebody dies. But an autopsy is something that Cardinal Villot vigorously refused to allow throughout the entire day. Like, give me a break. You don't allow the Pope's body, who just died suddenly, to go through an autopsy? That's guilty, all stamped over your forehead. Those are red flags or smoking guns, and it's disgusting that it's gone on this. They've almost got away with it for this long. But people can believe, and people will make up their own minds, I guess. But when you look at the facts, I don't know how you could ever think that, oh, well, they just did that. I don't know how you could justify that, to say that, the Pope died of natural causes. Because if he did, like, they would have drained the blood, they would have taken the organs, they would have done an autopsy like you do normally with a dead body, especially with somebody important as the Pope. So for them to go through all these steps to make sure no blood is taken, no organs, it's just only guilty people would do that. So it is what it is. You can believe whatever you want, I guess, but the facts are there. So it frustrates me that anybody would not believe that this was a murder, because only guilty people would act the way that they acted with this. But so then, after all this had gone on, the Pope had been murdered. His apartment had been scrubbed clean, top to bottom. All of his belongings had been removed and done. God only knows what they did with them. And then the Pope was embalmed. There was no blood drawn, no organs, no autopsy done. So at 9 p.m. it was all over. Villot retired to bed. How he was able to sleep for any night the rest of his life, I'll have no idea. But obviously that scumbag probably did. So that's the thing. When you're living as the worst version of yourself, sometimes you get just so into it. It's like, you're just. Everybody was good. Even every player in this story was good. They're all influenced by Satan and the devil, or Satan and his demons. And it's everybody in this story is good, and we're influenced to do evil. But but some people get to the worst versions of themselves, and even when they get all this information about the world that should know better, they're so corrupted, and they're that Satan has such an influence on them that they almost willingly go for it. And that's kind of what these guys are doing. They know better, but they willingly serve Satan and his Illuminati and all these things. So it's tough. I mean, it's tough as a Christian, because I know that they're not my enemy. The true only one and only enemy is Satan. So it's like it's like I will not, certainly not accept them and tolerate them as the worst version of themselves. And I will be on a collision course with Satan and his Illuminati and any evil empire Satan tries to set up for as long as I have energy and I'm in existence. I will be fighting against evil. But it's just some of these guys that know better and fight for evil. It's like it's not. I guess I'll say it. It's tough to see them, to be the Christian and see them, to love them and to see them as like they're not the enemy. But if somebody needs a punch in the face, they're getting a punch in the face. And I'll kick. My motto is I will kick your ass good, but I will help you up after. I'll shake your hand. We'll have a beer after. Make sure you're okay. But man, if it comes to it and you need it, I will kick your ass good. I am not worried to do that. But it's just when I see people willingly. People that should know better, that are willingly working for Satan and his Illuminati. I just can't. There's no other way for me to say it. I want to kick their ass. But so it's but when it comes down to, as long as they're not harming, as long as they're not bringing physical harm to me or any other good person, it's like I'm more than happy to settle for kicking people's ass, with information and with the truth, because it's like I don't want to fight. I don't like to. I can fight, but I don't like to fight. I don't want to. I just much rather have fellowship with anybody and everybody, and I want to be the best version of myself, and I want to interact with the best versions of everybody else in the best version of society, and that's what I want. And so, but I'm not going to tolerate evil, and I'm not going to tolerate the worst versions of people. I'm not going to tolerate good people being hurt, harmed, terrorized, anything like that. I'm just not going to do it. But I kind of got off on a tangent. But so it was 9 p.m. Valo retired to bed, and Pope John Paul I had been reduced to just a memory. 16 hours after his 16 hours, man, like not even close to 24. 16 hours after his strange death, it was as if he never existed. Their plan had succeeded. And it breaks my heart to read about his end, to know what he was going to do, to know how amazing and great of a man he was, and how amazing of a pope he was, and would have been, even just things he could have done and accomplished, and what he would have been if he would have lived his full life, is just so amazing to think about. But unfortunately, they were able to successfully complete their plan and make him just a memory, basically make him like he never existed. And he did. In the world that I lived in, Pope John Paul I did not exist. Not until I just had that random thought to look into it. And I thank God that he put that in, gave me that influence to think that thought, and so I could get on that path and just uncover all this truth. And I'm not going to stop as long as I have breath in my lungs, a heart beating in my chest. I'm going to push this truth out there. I'm going to try and bring to success all the things that Pope John Paul I wanted to do, and I'm going to try to bring justice to Satan and his Illuminati for doing this to him. And it's like when you look, you could believe the main Vatican story if you want, but when you just look at everything and you look at the facts, I really believe you can't settle on anywhere but that the murder of Pope John Paul I is the truth. And so but that so going back to how once the process of embalming his body was completed, they were in the clear, because at that point an autopsy is completely useless. So that's why they took that risk. And with his apartment being washed, polished, and sealed, an investigation was completely useless. That's why they took the risk of looking guilty by immediately moving to clean it up. Because no matter what people thought, you can't investigate it and get some hard facts out of the room. Excuse me. If it's been cleaned, so that's why they did it, because an investigation was useless. And with all his possessions and papers carried off, all proof of evil was gone. All there was were the memories and any other information that people, loyal and connected to Pope John Paul I had. And that's how David Yallop was able to get this book together, was people that were loyal to Albino Luciani. They didn't want to see him just fade off into the night, and just to see these people get away with it, and to see them to see none of the plans that Albino Luciani had, Pope John Paul I, none of the plans come to success. They didn't want to see that, so they made their efforts to put the truth out there, to put the facts, to let people know how these guys conducted themselves around the crime scene, how things were done to just like that had never been done before. Like it's like even though like there was a successful plan for them, but thankfully through other people being connected to God and Jesus, having one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, man, that fortitude, having that, they were able to keep this truth pushing forward out there, and just have the courage and the strength to do what's right, even though you might be scared that something bad might happen to you or anything like that. It's like you just can't. You have to do what's right, and we'll cross that bridge when we comes to it. And if Satan and anybody loyal to him wants to stand that bridge, it is what it is. Sometimes you might have to kick their ass, but it's just, kicking someone's ass is just like I said. You kick their ass, then you make sure they're okay, help them up, have a drink with them afterwards. It's show them the error of their ways. So it's like, but it's thankful to the courage. The truth has been kept forward and trying to put out there. So I will never stop, and hopefully it'll get out there on a much more mainstream scale than it is now. But and then just to talk a little bit about Karol Wojtyła. I butchered that obviously, but that's the real name of Pope John Paul II, and he was elected to the papacy after the death of Pope John Paul I. And he was in a unique position where he would have been able to bring all of Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, all of his plans to fruition. He was in that unique position. He's the one guy that probably could have made their plan unsuccessful at that time. But unfortunately, as we've seen, you look back in history, not one of Albino Luciani's plans became a reality. Absolutely disgusting. So it was now for sure officially complete. Pope John Paul I had been basically erased and acted like, and basically made it like he never even existed. And so coming off of that, Pope John Paul II allowed all the members named in the scandal report to remain, and he allowed the entire evil criminal culture to continue, and all the illegal activities to continue, and with interest, giving people promotions, giving people more power, giving people more to control. It just didn't just allow people to keep doing what they're doing. He gave them even more interest on all the problems that have been caused by Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I. Like, just disgusting, and makes me absolutely sick. But that's why I'm filled with a resolve to keep this moving forward, and to try and bring this truth to light. And and he made his right, and look who his hand man and bodyguard was. The gorilla, Bishop Paul Marcinkus. His banker, like his big banker, originally Roberto Calvi. Like, it's just pathetic. Like, I just wish there was some good people that had some power with eyes on this that would have been able to see, like, man, look what they're doing. Like, this is too obvious that they're guilty. But unfortunately, there was nobody that had that kind of power at the time. And this one really is just disgusting. These guys love their symbols, they love their numbers, they love their doing things on anniversaries, because it's all about energy. It's like create symbols. They know that they create a symbol so it has energy. So every time you look at that symbol, you feel an energy. They use numbers, so every time you look at this number, you feel an energy. It's they do things on anniversaries and things like that. So there's energy. There's lots of people thinking about a certain event at that time. There's lots of connected energy going on. That's why they use their anniversaries and things like that. So so that's why they do all their like lots of their stupid little sacrifices and their little plans. They all happen on certain specific numbers, specific dates, on anniversary of things, because they're trying to tap into as much energy as possible and turn that into negative, influence negatively, and just harness it negatively. So that's why they do all that things. And case in point, 3 years to the date after the death of Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, Paul Marcinkus was given a big promotion. Like, what an absolute slap in the face and spitting in the face to one of the greatest men in the history of the world. And just to try and stick it to God and his people a little more. On the 3rd anniversary of his death, they give Paul Marcinkus, the guy that probably killed him, they give him a promotion. Like, it's just makes me sick. But it's so we're kind of coming to the end of talking about the murder of Pope John Paul I. The last little detail, talk about June 17th, 1982. The Roberto of that banker that's been connected to them, Roberto Calvi, was found hanging under the Blackfriars Bridge in the city of London. And that's, like that, even though Pope John Paul I wasn't able to do everything he wanted to with exposing these guys, there were other things that happened on smaller scales and other scandals and things that happened and other investigations that people were trying to do. Not that would have had the same big impact as Pope John Paul I, but just different ones. And because of things like that, sometimes there needs to be a fall guy. Somebody needs to pay the price and the penalty. And on June 17th, 1982, that person was Roberto Calvi. So, but I remember, that this moment was significant to me, because I remember this was kind of like the end little tidbit of the murder of Pope John Paul I. But I remember watching, when I was doing my research, I think it was like an Illuminati New World Order. It was one of those types of documentaries, but it started with this June 17th, 1982, the murder of Roberto Calvi, and then it went on to talk about things from after that. But man, for the life of me, can't find it again. Don't remember what it was called. Have never seen it again, but I wanted to watch it again because I watched that before I knew about the story, like everything that happened with the murder of Pope John Paul I. Excuse me. But once I learned about it, I wanted to watch that documentary again, but I could not find it. So anybody out there happens to be watching or remembers watching an Illuminati type documentary that started with the murder of the murder of Roberto Calvi, his body hanging off the Blackfriars Bridge. If anyone remembers that documentary, with me up and with the title, because I'd like to watch it again. But this was always significant to me because of that. But that kind of is the end of the murder of Pope John Paul I story. I mean, things obviously keep going. I mean, Satan and his Illuminati have had control of everything from then till now. Before then, so I mean, that's kind of where the things start to. I mean, Pope John Paul I died in 1978, so I mean, like, things connected to him are going to start to fade away a little bit, and that's there by design as well. I mean, they did things specifically to make that happen, but but post the murder, with people trying to investigate it and bring up some of the facts that were known about the things that happened. The Vatican, you look at the statements they made following the murder and stuff like that, they lied about specific things. Specifically, they lied and changed the story about who discovered the body. Who discovered the body should not be up for question. It's a pretty easy thing to understand. Yet they lied. They lied about it, changed the story. So it's just, when people start lying and changing stories, that just says guilty. And the way that the Vatican and people involved were acting in this story just says guilty. There's no... innocent people don't act like that. If this was really natural causes, there would have been an autopsy. Things would have been done much different than they were. So it's just, not a lot of people believe that Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, was murdered like this. Most people believe the mainstream story that the Vatican has pushed, that it was this natural causes. But when you dig deeper and look at the facts, I believe that you can't deny that this was a murder, and that the facts show it, and that if we just need to get control. We need to get control in other positions in this world, so that we have the power to be like, okay, something happened with Pope John Paul I, and we want to investigate. We want to investigate all these banks involved, all these bankers, and follow the money trail. The money trail is where you find things, because these, like I said, all these people, Satan is Illuminati, everybody involved. Their God is money, their law is profit. That's all they care about. You follow the money trail, you'll get these guys. You'll get the players, the key players you need to crush this illegal empire, bring down Satan and his Illuminati once and for all. And then good people can have control of the world, but that's what we need. We need good people to get into power positions so they have a soapbox and they can say, "Hey everyone, I want to bring to you attention the murder of Pope John Paul I." And once people learn about that, they're going to want to know everything involved. They're going to want to know all the players. They're going to want an investigation, a real investigation where justice is actually trying to be found and people aren't able to, corrupt things and hide things and just keep their little evil negativity going. Like a real investigation. So, once we get good people into power positions, we can start to bring this stuff into the public light and let everybody know what's been going on in the shadows, behind the scenes, to keep people in control and to keep our society closer to the worst version of itself instead of the best. So that, I hope that, hopefully one day I can get into a power position to do that. But if I'm not, I don't care. I mean, like, I'd be more than happy to watch other good people get into power positions and bring this world to the best version of itself. That's all I care about. I mean, I want to be a leader. I want to do great things. I have lots of big dreams and plans, but at the same time, I would be okay with sitting back and watching, other people live as the best version of themselves and, just hit their dreams, hit their goals, and be the leaders and follow. Sometimes, a great quote from the movie Troy. Sometimes you must follow in order to lead. I would have no problem following following other good leaders, as long as they're connected to God and Jesus and they have the best version of themselves. They're trying to build the best version of themselves. Like, you're not going to be steered wrong. You're not going to be denied. You're not going to be backstabbed. It's not going to be ever found wanting. So it's just, I know my job in this world is to do everything I can to try and bring us to the best version of this world. And part of how we're going to do that is bringing justice to places where justice is needed. And the murder of Pope John Paul I is a big place where justice is needed. And when we're trying to bring down Satan and his Illuminati, we need to focus on our attention on the things that are going to have the most impact, the biggest impact, and exposing and figuring out everything about the murder of Pope John Paul I will absolutely do that for us, because now it'll let us follow the money trail. And it's going to be hard. The money trail is not as strong, as clear connected to this stuff. Obviously they've changed. Banks have changed and been created and destroyed and things like that, and up and down and this and that. But man, when you see how many banks these guys have and how many countries, like Nicaragua, Peru, things like that, I'm not saying these guys don't have societies and functioning places there, but in these third world countries, they have banks. They don't even, some of these places barely have food and water and they have a bank. Are you kidding me? But you put these banks in these third world countries, there's no eyes on you. There's nobody to ask questions. There's nobody there's nobody to provide any hoops for you to jump through. There's nothing. You basically can do whatever you want as long as you keep a certain amount of people happy with money and power and guns and drugs and whatever else. But it's it's just when you just break it down and you follow the trails, it's like you see, once you break it, once you see the truth, you just you can't figure out how you're ever deceived, because it seems so obvious once it's out there. But the smoke and mirrors are a real thing. But once you remove the smoke and mirrors, it's like it's easy to understand. It's so clear, and it's just it's not as complicated as it seems when you're first trying to dive into it. But I've already gone a long time, talked about it a lot, so I'll end it there. I'll end it here, and it's just I feel really strongly about just the legacy of Pope John Paul I, Albino Luciani now, and it's like I want that. I want to make him as public and as mainstream as possible. I want to bring the truth out about his murder. And I want to crush Satan and his Illuminati. So hopefully these two videos, last week part 1 and part 2 today, were able to help you understand and give you the information. And just it's one of it's hopefully it inspires someone to at least start looking into the things like Satan and his Illuminati, New World Order, like the Vatican, just all the stuff that's happened, and start looking into these things and see the truth for yourself, and eventually we can all come together, share the information we have, and really start kicking these guys' ass. So I just want to thank God for blessing us with a great man like Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I. I just thank God and Jesus for, just for giving us a chance to take back control, and to it would be so easy for them to just not provide us leaders and great people like Albino Luciani and other people in the world that are help us, guide us on the path towards trying to just connect us to God and Jesus. That's what it's all about. So I just I thank God. I just try to send as much good energy and strength out to everybody, so they can have the power, strength, and courage to be an example like Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, and to never be afraid to do the right thing and to try and bring evil to justice. So I'm going to end things there. As always, I thank everyone for coming along for the ride, and we'll see you soon down the road. Much love and God bless. Peace.